Welcome to Declassified Live. Operation Epic Fury and Operation Lion's War, not dystopian computer game names, but live, illegal wars of aggression being carried out by the USA and Israel on Iran right now. One of the most devastating massacres so far, a strike on a girls' primary school in southern Iran, killing 168 people, most of whom were children, took place on day one of the attacks. UNESCO has called the bombing a grave violation of humanitarian law. Our reporter, John McEvoy's exclusive this week, raises serious questions about whether the US Tomahawk missiles reportedly used in the attack included UK-made components. He'll be joining us later tonight. Almost 2 weeks into this illegal war of aggression, we will look at particularly in what way the UK is complicit, with a particular focus on the use of US bases here in the UK. There's so much secrecy surrounding the bases, but Declassified found a US War Department document highlighting 22 military sites in Britain. But there are other locations in Britain likely to host US military or intelligence personnel. So the number of sites could be 24 or more. But what are they used for? How much do they cost the UK taxpayer? What permissions need to be sought for their use? Why won't the legacy media call this an illegal war? We're going to explore all of these questions and more this evening with two further brilliant guests, Deputy Editor Dania Akkad and Pete Lux of the Lakenheath Alliance. And if you have questions, pop them in the comments of whatever platform you're watching this on, and we will get to them. Of course, being an independent media organisation, and I'm saying this at the very outset of our live tonight, and it won't be the last time that I say it, being an independent media organisation and being free to the report in the way that we do takes supporters, and your donations really do fund our investigation. So if you could become a regular donor to Declassified, that would be very much appreciated. I'm going to come straight away to Declassified's Deputy Editor, Dania Akkad. Dania has been interested in the US bases in the UK before the recent strikes on Iran and before Operation Midnight Hammer back in June 2025. Dania, first of all, good evening. I hope you're well. And I just wanted to start really by talking us through the main areas of your investigation. What questions, we'll come on to the context about Iran slightly later, but what questions we have about the US bases overall anyway?
Yeah. Hi, Laura. It's nice to see you. And thanks to everyone watching. We have a lot of questions about the use of British bases by the Americans. And I just wanted to start a little bit with what we do know, just to give a bit of context. We know that there are around 11,000 American military or intelligence personnel in the UK right now. And that there, as you said before, there are at least 24 sites across the country where the US operate. And they're either operating on those properties, which are our Royal Air Force properties, or they lease part of the property, or they actually hold bits of the property on those sites. And it's a really significant presence. It's the third largest deployment of the US Air Force in the world, just behind Japan and Germany. But, as you alluded to, there's a lack of transparency around the US use of these bases, which, to be honest, I've been surprised to realize. This is sort of a new topic for me. I've joined Declassified about 4 months ago and started digging into this. And I've just been very surprised by, how basic questions just aren't really answered. But anyhow, as I said, excuse me, there are a lot of questions. And my colleague and my boss, Mark Curtis, wrote a piece actually earlier this month with a list of 11 major questions we have that are really a helpful overview for anyone who wants to kind of get briefed and understand a bit more. And what I want to concentrate on really for our purposes tonight is on the most topical one, which is what US military operations need British approval. And so we know, before the U.S. and before the Israelis launched their strikes on Iran, that the U.S. asked for and was refused permission to use British bases to do its initial strikes on Iran. And clearly that was something that needed approval. But one question we have is whether the warplanes, the American warplanes that have been transiting through British bases to build up for the attack, transiting through to the Middle East, whether the U.S. had to seek approval for that. That is unclear. We asked, it was asked back in January to the Armed Forces Minister, what types of U.S. operations undertaken from UK bases required approval. And I just want to read out what the minister said, because it'll give you a flavor of kind of the opaqueness of all of this. He said, for operational security reasons, we do not offer comment or information relating to foreign nations' military operations. Permissions to utilize UK military bases are considered on a case-by-case basis, and the decision to grant permission is dependent on the nature and purpose of their activity. So very unclear.
So unclear. And of course, it is a foreign nation's military operations, but the operations also include the United Kingdom. You visited one of these US bases, didn't you? You went to Lakenheath. I wonder if we could just play a clip from there, because it was fascinating to see. You called it the raw American power. These planes are transiting through these UK bases on a very regular basis now. Let's just have a little look at that footage.
Okay, here we've got another plane coming over. This looks like another F-35. Is that about right? Let's see. F-35. Yeah.
Absolutely unbelievable, that, isn't it? And people around the bases will obviously hear the comings and goings, and obviously across the UK they might be able to hear these jets. There's been a huge buildup of military aircraft going through these bases. There's quite a few interesting planes for our YouTube channels that aren't necessarily about military operations, they're just looking at what's happening at these bases, but have seen loads and loads of different types of US military aircrafts. So one important point that I think we should go back to, obviously at one point Starmer said that he wasn't going to give permission for the US to use UK bases, and then he did say that he would. Let's have a look at what he said.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request.
But that was obviously after your visit to this base, and there were planes, transiting through these bases. So do you think the bases have been used to prepare for war with Iran in an offensive way, not a defensive way? I mean, I know, Dania, before you start, I know this is all very, very difficult to ascertain because of the opaque nature of our British parliamentary system and the civil service. So, I know there's huge caveats around this, but yeah, did you feel like there was a buildup of these aircrafts?
Oh yeah, but most definitely. I mean, this was observable, as of the first couple of weeks of January, the first week of January, and it was, the 2nd of January when Trump said he was locked and loaded and ready to help the Iranian protesters. So, anyone watching the news will have known that this was in Trump's mind, that this was potentially coming. And in fact, we know that the UK started moving their own defensive assets to the region, to the Gulf, to the Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean in January. So we know that the British government was poised for this and trying to get ready and knew this might be coming. And this is when we see so many of these planes coming through the RAF bases, Lakenheath, Mildenhall, Prestwick, a civilian airport in Scotland, was used. And
been under scrutiny lately, hasn't it, that the use of that base?
Yeah, and so it just shows the figure I think that Lakenheath Alliance for Peace put out, and we'll be talking to Pete Lux in a little while, and he can clarify. But I think it's over 100 fighter jets came through from January, and then there were over 25 C-17s, which are these big cargo planes that take troops and really important weaponry, usually ahead of an operation. So for sure, it's very clear that our bases, and when I say our, I know I sound American, but I mean British, were used for this buildup. And by the way, they're still being used. I know obviously a lot of our readers and viewers tonight will have seen the bombs that were loaded onto the aircraft at Fairford this week that got a lot of attention. But even today I was trying to, there was a story on GB News about special ops planes leaving Mildenhall yesterday, and I was trying to see on radar if I could find them. And I couldn't find them. What I did see were huge refueling tankers, American ones, just in and out of Mildenhall, like every couple of hours yesterday. I mean, it's still happening.
And I suppose, I mean, we have got a clip of the B-52 Let's put that up now. These are huge machines, aren't they? They're so kind of unnerving to see these huge aircrafts, bombs being loaded onto them. I said in the introduction to this about the way in which a school, there's been a massacre at a school where children have been bombed. And there's a kind of disconnect, I think, in the public consciousness about, number one, that these bases exist, just before, even in connection to the illegal war on Iran. And number two, now that they are in heavy use in connection to these attacks on Iran. Did you manage, when you were at the bases, to get any sense of what the community around the bases think of them, or was there not an opportunity, Dania?
Yeah, unfortunately in Lakenheath, there wasn't really like a nearby residential area where we could easily kind of talk to people. And a lot of the people we talked to were sort of self-selected plane spotting lovers. So kind of hard to gauge from that, but maybe Pete will have more to say on that. But I know for sure there are concerns amongst groups that are watching activity of Lakenheath that there may be nuclear weapons there that may have been brought over last year. And they're very concerned about what might happen if there was a nuclear accident at Lakenheath. So that's definitely of concern for the local population.
Well, of course, it's a massive concern. One of the things that I find really difficult about Starmer's, in Parliament and his statement to the nation, if you like, when he's done those about the request from Donald Trump, is how does the UK distinguish between offensive and defensive use of these bases? And we'll get into this a bit with Pete about what kind of permissions are needed to use them. Is it kind of, do they have to call, genuinely, do they have to call up and say, okay, this is coming through for this purpose? I presume not, but do you have any light to shed on that, the difference between offensive and defensive?
Yeah, no, I mean, you raised probably the most important question, the one we've been asking ourselves in the newsroom this week. Because Starmer, of course, as you point out, he's been really careful to emphasize from what he's saying that what the UK is doing, what the UK is allowing on its bases is defensive. And it kind of, maybe it makes sense to some people on paper, but when you start to break it down, it doesn't. It raises a lot of questions. And, some of the questions we have had in the newsroom are, is the US providing the UK with target lists for these apparent defensive strikes? Are they going to be audited afterwards, the strikes, to figure out whether they were in fact defensive strikes or what they were? And then, of course, the attack on the girls' school raises questions about the quality of these target lists that the Americans have. Are they using AI to make these lists? So are targets being shared? Are they good enough targets? And from the Iranian point of view, how will authorities there be able to tell that these US strikes that are launched from UK bases are defensive you know, are being done to protect allies, or if they're just kind of straight up offensive. And it's not really going to make a huge difference on the Iranian side. So it's a bit, when you start to untangle it, it doesn't quite make sense. And also, just to say, we put these questions to the MOD, and we'll have a story coming out tomorrow with the answers we got back. And I don't want to spoil it here, but we still have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I imagine we do have so many questions. I mean, I do, you know, and I imagine you do. You're researching this all of the time. We have this huge international moment where there is now a joint illegal war from the US and Israel, with these really kind of almost AI generated sounding operation names, so kind of so dystopian, and trying to disentangle in real time what is happening when it's such a fast pace. You know, we're not even 2 weeks in, Dania, and there is already, you know, an intensity, and of course gonna be a huge impact. And this is, you know, the important point for the people of Iran. You know, their country is under attack from two huge military powers, and that must be a really, I mean, this is an understatement, such a scary place to be. I'm going to bring Pete in. Dania, you're going to come back in a second. Thank you for all of your information on the bases. Please do keep sending in your questions. It is over to you, really. If you want to ask any of the panelists questions, this is your opportunity. So just, you can DM us, you can pop it in the comments. That's probably easier. And yeah, we'll try and put them to the people who are our guests. So Pete Lux is part of the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace. We've talked about the US bases in the UK, and I have to say, if you go onto our Declassified website, you'll see quite a build up now of articles, even in the last week, if you want to fill yourself in. But Pete, you're from, as I said, the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace. Thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. I imagine you are very busy at the moment. Just to start us off, could you tell us, how long's your campaign been going? What's it about? You know, I know we're talking to you now in the midst of yet another illegal war, but your organisation has been campaigning for some time. Let's everyone hear what the organisation's about.
Well, the organisation was started in 2024, and it was because of concerns about the return of nuclear weapons. But it's been an ongoing thing for a long time about Lakenheath, because they had nuclear weapons up until 2008. And so, of course, before then, there was quite a few protests about nuclear weapons at the RAF Lakenheath, and along with the other activities. So there was protests when Lakenheath was used for the bombing of Libya in 1986, I believe. 2004, people broke in because of the Iraq and Afghan war. There was people broke into the base, some of them on bicycles, which is kind of quite novel. 2006, people broke into the base, chained themselves onto a munitions dump which had cluster bombs. So it's been an ongoing thing. But when we heard that the nuclear weapons could be returning, we formed Lakenheath Alliance for Peace in 2024. We hold monthly vigils the third Saturday of every month. We hold a peace camp every year. This year, the peace camp is from the 1st till the 6th of April. So it's just the most recent manifestation of quite a long campaign about RAF Lakenheath.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, what I'd like to unpick for everybody watching is, well, what is the political problem with these bases? Why does it matter? You know, is it about legality? Is it about sovereignty? I think it's quite an interesting question to think about especially on the right, notions of sovereignty and, you know, having control over our own land and all that kind of stuff. Yet we don't seem to have very much control over these bases. Is it none of that? Is it something else? What is the main contention with these bases from your organisation's point of view?
There's a multitude. I mean, we're an alliance of about 65 different organisations. They're coming from different aspects. But some of the things is we're not allowed to know whether, you know, we don't know whether there's nuclear weapons on there. We're pretty sure that they did arrive last year, but they will neither confirm nor deny. There's very little debate, and that debate is useful. How do we know we're going to make the right decision if you're not allowed to have a debate, if you're not allowed to know the basic facts? Is it the right thing to go and attack Iran? And there's been very little debate about that. We're just told this is happening, you have to put up with it. There is the question about sovereignty and democracy, and as with a lot of military bases, we have very little control, but in particular, a base which is being operated by the United States. It is a British base, in that, you know, the UK is responsible for what actually happens at that base in international law. So if this is a war of aggression, the UK is committing a war of aggression.
And yeah, you know, I imagine it's been a long running campaign. The point that you make about the opaque nature, I mean, we talk quite a lot in Declassified about democracy being an illusion, and it's not just a quip, not just a slogan, but you're right. You've just talked about no debate about, you know, no debate or time in Parliament to discuss the use of bases for assistance with this illegal war, and how does that come to pass? I mean, do you think, and again, you know, I really do stress, we know that there's a lot of secrecy around this, but do you think there's much kind of day-to-day communication between the US and UK in relation to how these bases are used? Is it like that you have to request permission, or, you know, I imagine there's legal agreements that the countries share, but could you shed some light on that?
No, because they won't tell us.
That might be the answer.
We know that there are agreements, but we're not allowed to know what those agreements are. And in the court case, when the people broke in for about the cluster bombs, in the court case, they got a civil servant from the UK who was in charge of the, you know, managing the US bases. And when we asked, you know, what do you know about what's going on at the base? They said nothing. We just trust the Americans. So that a civil servant under oath in court. So it's very unclear. So
it's unclear in terms of, you know, the transparency around permission. Maybe there's like it's kind of deferred to a level of trust. But what does that mean actually legally? You know, in terms of, you know, we are now a participant in an illegal war. Is the use of these bases, does that constitute as participation? Dania and I just talked a little bit before about trying to distinguish, you know, and again, she made a very, very good point that it doesn't really matter much to the Iranian people, but what distinguishes between offensive and defensive use of the bases. You know, does the fact that a lot of this is based on trust not cause big questions for us legally?
I don't think there's a big question about it legally, because it is British sovereign territory. If you look at all the stuff in international law, if you allow a third state to use your territory for an attack on another, you're part of that crime. So okay. I don't legally, there may be people who would disagree, but I think it's quite clear legally what the position is. If we allow the US to use this base for an illegal war of aggression, the UK is committing an illegal war of aggression.
Pete, I've just got a couple of comments from people who are watching that I'd like to put to you. It's along the themes that we've been talking about, but Grace talks about national security and the use of defence argument, providing the UK and the USA anonymity and immunity when they're breaking the law. You know, there's a transparency issue here, isn't there? We've just talked about that. I wonder, you know, is part of your campaign about trying to force more detail out of the government on the use of these bases? What are some of the political aims? We talked about the political contentions, but what about some of the political aims of your group?
Again, we're a alliance, so there's a multitude. One of the things that needs to come across is we're pushed into these wars. You know, suddenly we're at war. What side do you support? What we're saying is we need to talk about peace. How do you get peaceful solutions to these? And most people in the world, whether you're in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, most of the normal people want peace. So it's part of that normal people just saying, look, you lot, you need to sort it out because we're fed up of the bombs, we're fed up of the wars, we want peace, we want security. And I think that's an important message, which is not discussed in the media a lot. It's great, you know, people are drawn to these things with missiles flying, and these can be quite boring. A bunch of people sitting in a room quietly solving these problems doesn't get a lot of media attention. It's not talked about. So we need to actually raise the voice for peace.
And that has kind of definitely been under attack, even in such an unstable world. You know, so many people are banging the war drums. You know, we're also, you know, I imagine in your coalition there are people who are fighting against poverty and making the case against war and the cost that is spent on war. You know, I've read some eye-watering figures about the cost of the US attacks on Iran so far, into the billions. You know, we're not even 2 weeks in. In the UK, there will be a cost to using these bases for the UK taxpayer and for our participation in this illegal war. So I imagine part of it is about making the case for, you know, instead of bombs, you know, the kind of welfare, not warfare kind of politics here, and making sure that is brought back into popular discussion.
Yeah, well, one of the F-35 probably costs about $100 million. That could be the cost of a small hospital. The F-35s themselves, the maintenance, it's $38,000 per hour to keep them in the air. The F-22s are a lot more expensive. They're $80,000 per hour to keep in the air. And when you're considering the number of planes that have been just to fly over from the US to the UK, you've got 100 of these planes flying over, and there's still more sitting ready to go over to Iran at the moment. When you consider those costs, the costs in the rising oil prices, I know we probably should be moving away from oil, but just that.
The reality is we're still using it, and you know the rise in cost of oil will have an impact on people in the UK.
Yes, and the bases themselves, the US pays no rent. They're responsible for the buildings and stuff like that, but they don't rent them where they're just given to them to use. So, and the influence on the local economy is negligible. If Lakenheath, there's Lakenheath, Mildenhall, and there's also Feltwell. Feltwell used to be a deep space monitoring site, but those three bases, they've got golf courses, shopping centres. So it's a little US site, 3 sites, which are a little US area within the UK.
Okay, and we've got a bit of a technical question here, Pete, if that's all right. But this is about, you know, and we kind of saw some of the questions around why on earth during the genocide the UK was, you know, the spy missions over Gaza when Israel has such a sophisticated surveillance capacity, I imagine. Why does the US, it's a similar question, why does the US need the UK to launch fighter planes nowadays? Why are they like strategically important to the US? Couldn't they just get there themselves without having to use the UK to transit through?
The fighter jets are limited in range, so that's why you need the refueling planes going up from Mildenhall to what is called tow them in to into Lakenheath. They then need to go out to the Middle East. It's another leg where the refueling planes go out, which we can track the refueling planes. We can't track the fighter jets. So it's that thing of actually having quite a safe base away from the conflict to then transfer. There's also the political implication is we're in it with the Americans now. You know, it's very difficult for us to say. So it's that political support as well.
That makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense if you are an anti-war campaigner and fighting for peace, but strategically, I understand. I see that it's been reported that the war against Iran has exceeded 11.3 billion in the first 6 days alone, in relation to the US. So these are eye-watering costs, and in the UK, you know, it's gonna have an impact on fuel prices. You know, I'm sure it'll also be an excuse, although they are an austerity government, but to kind of ramp up the cutting to public services is always the case when we are at war. A closing comment from you, Pete, if you wouldn't mind. How do people get involved in your campaign? In what way would they do that?
Well, we're Lakenheath Alliance for Peace. You can find us on. You can find our website. You can find us on, you know, social media. We have a peace camp running from the 1st until the 6th of April. On the Saturday, the 4th, is going to be a big demo rally with coaches coming from London, Norwich, Manchester. I think people from Yorkshire. We're still working on finding out where the coaches are coming from. So that'll be a good day to actually be down there if you can't make the peace camp. But of course, a peace camp is a good way of networking people from across the country. So we've got people from different places, might be near different bases. So that should be a very useful event as well.
Pete, thanks very much for coming on this Declassified Live, and thank you very much for everything that you do. Just for everyone else, the website, the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace website, is on the screen now, but of course people can go to your website at their leisure. Thanks very much again, Pete. We really are helped to carry out our investigations at Declassified through your funding and your support, your monthly support. And we're setting ourselves an ambition of this year of trying to get at least 4,000 regular supporters of Declassified. It's a tall aim, but we hope to achieve it. And even if you have a small amount, we are so grateful. We know things are tough, but if you can afford to donate monthly, that would really help us. These investigations take time, and of course we're independent, and that is the absolute beauty of Declassified. We're independent, so we're able to go into in-depth investigations, holding the government to account, but also corporations and so much more. So if you can donate, that would be very much appreciated. I'm going to come to John McEvoy now. Thank you so much to John for joining us. And Welcome, John.
Thanks very much, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. John, you published an exclusive this week. Could you talk to us about this article, please, and set some kind of context for some of the big questions that this article raised?
Yeah, sure. So on the first day of this illegal US-Israeli war on Iran, a girls' school in southern Iran was bombed. Over 150 children were killed in this strike. And initially, the US government tried to wash its hands of it. They basically said, "Oh, we don't know who did it. It was probably a missile from Iran that went AWOL." However, some open source investigations subsequently came out showing that it was there was a Tomahawk missile that kind of struck the compound right next to it shortly after that initial strike on the Iranian girls' school. And now neither Iran nor Israel are known to possess any Tomahawk missiles. It's only the US, which obviously strongly suggested that it was US forces that had bombed this school, causing, I think, the largest kind of mass atrocity event at the hands of the US military in decades. It recalls the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And so as soon as the news about the Tomahawk missile came out, I kind of recalled that some parts for these missiles were produced in the UK. So I basically investigated what components and what percentage of the Tomahawk program is produced in the UK. And there was a Raytheon factory in Glenrothes in Scotland. And they've been producing components for the Tomahawk missiles for about 20 years now. Every time the US Navy issues a new contract for Tomahawk missiles, this factory gets, between 3 and 4%, which doesn't sound very much, but these are, 6-figure, 7-figure, 8, sometimes 8-figure contracts that go out. So this factory is making a significant amount of money from supplying these components. And now, in the time since our investigation was published, the US has launched a kind of preliminary inquiry, and they have found themselves responsible for this strike. They're claiming it was an errant missile, that they were effectively given faulty intelligence from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, this may be true, but I find it quite difficult to believe, given open source investigations have shown that the girls' school was held outside of this compound for many, many years before the strike. I think before 2016, it was already outside of this compound. And secondly, if you listen to the words of Pete Hegseth, who's the US Secretary for War, I mean, he's been coming out and saying quite flagrantly, the rules of the game are finished. We're no longer doing woke war. Basically saying we have no, respect for international law. Our targeting doesn't care about wokery. So I think if you actually listen to the words of US officials, it's quite plausible that they're attacking civilian infrastructure on purpose, and it recalls what Israel has been doing with US support over the past 3 years. Flattening Gaza, no respect for international law, and targeting civilians, of course, has been a fundamental component of that campaign with US backing.
I mean, just like a really important piece of work that you did this week, John. So well done for that, because we obviously are thinking about these huge machines, these very expensive bombs. At the end of the day, people in school were bombed. On the first day of this illegal war. This is unbelievably shameless stuff that should actually end the term of a president for such a brutal miscalculation, whatever they say it is, that has resulted in many children murdered by that Tomahawk missile. I want us to kind of to zoom out a bit now, John, if you don't mind, and think about the aims of this war. I mean, obviously we're talking about the aims of people who are trying to create propaganda for the war as well. So absolutely everything has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But let's just go to Pete Hegseth and listen to him and what he says the aims of the war are.
The terms of this war will be set by us at every step. As I said Monday, the mission is laser focused. Obliterate Iran's missiles and drones and facilities that produce them, annihilate its navy and critical security infrastructure, and sever their pathway to nuclear weapons. Iran will never possess a nuclear bomb, not on our watch, not ever.
Okay, so obviously a massive focus on obliterating Iran's capacity to have nuclear weapons from his kind of from the podium there, you know, obviously such kind of machoistic, aggressive language that's been used in most of the press conferences I've seen. But in terms of legality, I mean, they're just quite brazen really about what their aims are, and they're not in accordance with international law, are they?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Tomahawk issue, I mean, the words coming out of the likes of Donald Trump, Peter Hesketh, I mean, that should be sufficient for the UK government to conclude that these people are not committed to complying with international humanitarian law. And for that reason, these kinds of arms exports should be in violation of the UK strategic arms export licensing regime. But of course, there are political issues at stake. But I wanted to zoom out even further, because I think the US and Britain, to a significant degree, have been at war with Iran for decades now. You go back to 1953. I think you can draw a straight line between the events of today and 1953, when the US, particularly the CIA, as well as MI6, collaborated together to overthrow the secular socialist Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, for the simple reason that he wanted to nationalize Iran's massive oil reserves, which at the time were owned by the Iranian Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which is now BP. So this really kicked off the sequence of events that we see now. And ever since the Iranian Revolution, 1979, the US has continued this war. They've placed Iran under brutal sanctions. The US Navy downed an Iranian civilian airliner, killing around 280 people. Britain helped in the cover-up in that. They've killed Iranian generals like Qasem Soleimani. So the US has been, repeatedly, effectively at war up until this point anyway. And I think that provides a kind of backdrop to the more recent events. And of course, the sanctions have been explicitly explained by US officials as trying to, create sufficient misery and poverty amongst the Iranian civilian population that they'll do the dirty work for the US and Israel. They'll rise up and overthrow their government. And that's the explicit and stated goal of the brutal sanctions regime on Iran. Of course, Iran signed, going back to the nuclear issue, they signed the Iranian nuclear deal with under Obama with the US, which basically they agreed to not enrich uranium and plutonium to such a degree that they could create nuclear weapons. And they were adhering to their obligations under that agreement. In 2018, Trump comes in and he explodes that deal. And so these are the kind of events that lead us up to now. But I think with regards to the nuclear issue, we need to talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, because this is a man who's wanted to see the events of the past 2 weeks, going back 30, 40 years. He said on several occasions over the past 3 decades that Iran is on the cusp of, procuring a nuclear weapon, because his goal over this entire period has been to get, the big brother, to get the US involved, because Israel cannot contain and deal with Iran on their own. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu's specific goal in this campaign is not just, to bring US into the war. I think they want to create effectively a failed state in Iran, to create total chaos in Iran, so that country can no longer pose any kind of military or diplomatic regional threat to Israel. So it cannot kind of balance that power. So I think that's the important context that we kind of need to talk about. And it's for that reason that Iran, rightly in my opinion, sees the present military attack on it as an existential threat. So they're effectively fighting for their survival. They've watched 2.5 years of genocide in Gaza. They've seen over recent days the US bombed a girls' school. Israel has bombed fuel depots, destroying the water supply to Tehran. It was raining oil over Tehran. They effectively dropped a dirty bomb on Tehran. So we're seeing the kind of continuation of the logic of Gaza being applied to Iran at the moment. So that's the kind of calculus that is happening at the moment. And that's why we've seen such a major response from Iran in terms of targeting US bases across the region and targeting Israel, and trying to make sure that that calculus doesn't come into play, that calculus that Iran is effectively turned into a failed state. So I think that's the broader picture of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, very, very well explained. And you just wouldn't know it from anything that you see in the mainstream media. And I know we have a vested interest to say that, but we are at pains, as an independent media organisation, but we are at pains to hear anyone, there's such media discipline in the UK, isn't there, to not be calling this an illegal war, to not scrutinise properly the history. It was exactly the same with the genocide in Gaza, as if history started on October the 7th, that there was nothing that led before that, no scrutiny of the occupation. The same is here, that the focus is on Iran as this big threat, and we know that there has been 15, 20 years of Islamophobia that is kind of cultivating this threat of this country. And they're having to work very, very hard at the propaganda in relation to this war. Donald Trump, a deeply unpopular president, and I imagine people are extremely disgruntled about this attack, considering, I think a lot of the MAGA supporters were about America first and not going in illegal wars. And similarly in the UK, Starmer, completely unpopular. I actually don't know anybody that likes Keir Starmer or who would vote for him, but he's kind of being attacked by the right for not going in gun-ho enough and kind of joining in these offensive attacks, even though there are huge questions, as we just talked about with Dania, over that in relation to the use of UK bases. And then we're in this strange situation where there is no transparency about the use of those bases and the level of our participation. So I know this is a really hard question, and we might bring Dania back in a second for her opinion on this as well. But what are the ramifications for people in the UK politics, on us being dragged into another illegal war? We don't know. Who knows how this will end, if you like, especially for the Iranian people who have long suffered, and of course now are experiencing probably the most terrifying situations. And as you talk about the environmental impact of what they've been through this, the destruction of warfare, but what do you think the consequences are going to be longer term in terms of how this shapes our political systems?
So in military terms, what's been quite interesting in terms of the UK and the US is the success with which Iran has been able to respond to this illegal war in terms of targeting a lot of US bases across the Gulf. Hezbollah likely targeted RAF Hakatiri on Cyprus. And it seems like a lot of those countries' leaderships are losing confidence in the US-UK ability to protect them at a time of war. Now, a lot of the civilian populations of those countries already detest the US and they already detest Israel. So I think you might see a weakening in the confidence of many of those countries in the US-UK ability to actually protect them when they launch a kind of aggressive attack on the likes of Iran. So I think that may have major consequences for US-UK power projection in that crucially important oil-rich region in the future. In terms of the UK, I think the kind of tension between foreign policy and democracy is getting heightened at this time, right? Because we haven't had any parliamentary vote on the use of US forces using bases carrying, £2,000 bombs over to Iran. Nobody knows. The UK government probably doesn't know the full extent to what they're being used for at the moment. And if you look at the polling, I mean, you wouldn't know it from the mainstream media. I've seen on the BBC that, Starmer's got it right. He's with the public opinion. He's not with the public opinion. A YouGov poll came out just earlier saying that the vast majority of the UK public do not want US forces to use UK bases as a lily pad to attack Iran. So once again, like the Iraq war, which was majorly unpopular at the time before it was actually launched, you've seen once again that the majority of the British public don't want something the UK is doing. There's no democratic oversight. There's no parliamentary vote. So that tension between foreign policy and democracy is heightening. And in the short to medium term, assuming that this goes on, another week, another 2 weeks, we don't know if it's going to go on another 2 years. And the domestic economic consequences are going to be massive. So we may see a massive flight of refugees from the region. I think around 3 million people have already been forcibly displaced in Iran. But you're simultaneously seeing the massive skyrocketing in oil prices because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, they've tried to balance that over the past few days by releasing massive reserves of oil to basically balance the price of oil. But that can't be done indefinitely. So internal UK briefings that were released yesterday basically say after week 3, worst case scenario, the price of oil could be going up to $150, $200 a barrel, which is going to mean inflation, rise of cost of living. So it's effectively disastrous on all fronts, I would say. Yeah.
And really, really interesting on further of the right, Farage and Reform seem to be kind of unsure on what they believe. He said in a press conference, we should never, ever have said no to the Americans using the bases, particularly Diego Garcia. So there are differing opinions as to whether we should physically join the attacks. I, as a leader, am saying to you, if we can't even defend Cyprus, let's not get ourselves involved in another foreign war. So contradictory, but also speaks to your point, John, about that projection of power. He's clearly not projecting an image of UK power in the world at all, and probably will be part of some kind of election spiel. Dania, join in the conversation. Is anything that John said struck you? We're all colleagues here, we're having these conversations, but anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think I have 3 main thoughts. John touched on the cost of living. We're going to feel this conflict here. We're already feeling it. Gas prices have risen. Mortgage rates are going. If you had to renew your mortgage this week, you will have been impacted by this war. So the longer it goes on, the more the impact we're going to have. So that's one thing. But that feels a little bit, I don't know, like first world problems. Obviously, for a lot of people, that's not first world problems. It's actually seriously like heating your house, heating, things like that. But I guess I also wanted to say I'm thinking about also people across the Middle East. So not just the Iranians, but people in the UAE, people in Lebanon. And I've got Syrian family who fled the Syrian war who are now living in Dubai and Beirut. And they're having to live through these crazy situations for a war that the more reports we see, the more news emerges. There wasn't really a plan. This wasn't really thought through. It's clear that they didn't even really think that much about the Strait of Hormuz. So that's another thing. And then the third thing I want to mention in terms of ramifications going forward is the U.S.-UK relationship. What's going to happen with that? And I guess I just wonder, is this going to be a moment when the British government decides, well, this is enough, actually, and moves, towards more of an alliance with, say, France and Germany, and says, hey, wait a minute, this has crossed a red line. Let's not go there anymore. Or are we going to have to keep kind of doubling down? Brits, I'm not talking about Americans here, double down and just keep going down this path with the Americans that leads us into these illegal wars. So I think there are going to be some big questions about that, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, these are huge existential questions, aren't they? Maxine has asked a really important question, and we're going to bring John back. I don't expect you to answer this, John. I am going to come to you for any concluding points. What can we do to stop British bases and aircrafts from being used in this illegal war? Such a good question, straight to the point. Is there anything that people can do?
You can support Declassified as we try and expose what they're doing. The first thing we need to do is know precisely what is actually going on with these bases, which is precisely what we've been doing over the past 2 weeks. We've been trying track where the planes are going. We've been trying to track the munitions that are sold from the UK to the US, then used in the war on Iran. So I think the first step is actually knowing what precisely they're doing. In terms of stopping them, obviously it seems like a mean feat, but there are protests, as Peter Lux was explaining earlier. There are campaign organisations that focus on the specific bases. Obviously, the key ones here are RAF Fairford, Lakenheath, and Mildenhall. And there's also just general movement building to build a broader, stronger, more cohesive anti-war movement in the UK, which combines, the media, Declassified UK specifically, Stop the War campaign against the arms trade. These are all different organisations and movements that you can support, contribute to, but also learn from, to basically build a broader movement to stop this.
I fully agree with that. I mean, obviously, Pete did mention and reference a couple of things that are coming up very soon. We just had a Challenge in the War Machine conference. I'm sure we'll have another event in the future that brings together all of those anti-war organisations. Now is the time, if ever there was a time, to urgently fight for peace here in the UK and across the world. The price is so high to not do that, to not try and popularise anti-war politics, I suppose, as broadly as we can in relation to Gaza, Iran, and anywhere else. I think, John, could you just give us any closing comments? If you've done, absolutely fine. I'm going to move to Dania, but if you have any closing comments on, this is such a big moment. It feels like there's been so many big moments in the last 2 years, but this is another illegal war. US, Israel, and the UK are implicated.
Yeah, I think we're just seeing Starmer being Starmer as he has been. I mean, he's performatively pretending to oppose this war as he performatively pretended to oppose Israel's actions in Gaza. He's taken performative measures to pretend that he opposes it, like this semantic misnomer of defensive operations, but in material terms, as he did with the genocide in Gaza, he's still providing material support, material assistance to what is fundamentally an illegal war. It is not possible to defend the aggressor who has initiated an illegal war. This is semantically perverse, and it's rationally impossible. So that's just what I would say. I don't think we should allow Starmer to confuse us, even if he has managed to confuse the mainstream media.
Absolutely right, and what a brilliant point to end on that. Dania, you are our deputy editor, and just before people go off and enjoy their evenings, obviously this is all so heavy. What Declassified deals with is heavy. This is about how the government is behaving around the world. This is about an unaccountable, undemocratic system. So you're going to tell us about a couple of other things that have been worked on recently at Declassified, and send us off with some reading to do.
Yeah, I'm going to send you off with a lot of reading. I wanted to highlight a piece that my colleague Phil Miller has done along with a filmmaker in Cyprus, which takes a look at a woman named Melanie Stilios, who's running for MP in kind of the constituency that borders RAF Akrotiri. And I love this piece. It's really stuck with me because obviously the news of the drone striking Akrotiri last week was kind of big, but it goes into some depth and gives some context about the opposition there to, one of Britain's last colonial outposts. And it kind of gives you a sense of like why people feel the way they do there. So I would really recommend that people read that. Obviously, John's Tomahawk piece was brilliant. I mean, everything John does is brilliant. And Mark's 11 questions about the U.S. bases are really, sorry, I'm going a little bit faster than the screen here, but yeah, Mark's piece about the 11 questions about American bases. And also I'd really recommend tomorrow, if you're looking for something to read, we're going to have an excellent story kind of going through what the MOD did or didn't tell us about our questions about what is this defensive policy and how does it actually work. That'll be out tomorrow morning. And then next Monday, take a look. We've got another John investigation, and this is a really great one. If anyone was following along in last year when it came out that after the Labor government had partially banned arms exports to Israel because they were concerned that certain items would be used to violate international humanitarian law in Gaza, it turned out that like in the 3 months after those bans happened, there was a huge jump in arms export figures to Israel. And everyone wondered, what was that? Was it? And I think John has figured out the mystery. So that'll be coming Monday. So a lot of things for people to read that you won't find elsewhere. And just really, really hope people will read those stories.
Thank you so much, Dania. And thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. That's our hour over. It's gone so quick, so much to think about. And special thanks to Pete Lux from the Lakenheath Peace Alliance for joining us. We really appreciate when campaign groups take the time to tell us about the work that they do. You know, we are an independent media organisation. All of the things that you've heard about tonight, the investigations that Dania has just highlighted, is made possible. It is helped by your support. So thank you for everything that you do. By the way, if it's sharing, liking, subscribing, or becoming a monthly donor, we appreciate it so much. Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone.